shop owner who's been struggling for 2 years now says, "No one is able to help us but God. We pray for peace and we hope for a ceasefire."
Well, for more, let's bring in the former Deputy Coordinator for Counterterrorism at the US State Department, Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley. Gina, it's great to have you here on BBC News. Let's start with these Israeli negotiators returning from a week of what they're calling these significant ceasefire talks in Qatar. What do you think the Israeli position is at this point in the negotiations?
Well, it's going to be detailed in an extraordinary way, because what the prime minister in the end has to make clear is that whatever they end up with is going to be worth the delay of almost 2 years. And of course, the lives of the hostages that have been lost as negotiations were not even held. As we recall, most of the hostages were returned through diplomatic negotiations. So what does Israel end up with that is going to be different than what they started off with? Certainly more control over the Gaza Strip, a definition of the end of Hamas, and certainly, as we've seen in the last few days, there are still attacks against Israeli forces in Gaza. It is clear that Hamas, while not the vibrant fighting force that it was certainly a year ago, continues to resist the Israeli incursions into the Gaza Strip. And so there has to be something on the table that makes it all worthwhile.
And President-elect Donald Trump has a very close relationship with the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Mr. Trump has said he would like to see a deal done before he takes office in just a few weeks now. How might this impact Mr. Netanyahu's decisions?
Yeah, that's very true. Well, the president-elect has been very clear, saying he wants this done before he comes into office. It seemed as if the statement was directed at Hamas, and certainly the demand that the hostages be released. But no one should think that it also does not apply to the prime minister. And when he said get the deal done, that certainly adds pressure to both sides to find a way to close this out before the 20th of January. It's something that President Biden would also appreciate, to have it done while it's still on his watch.
And Israel's military also today are making quite a rare admission that its tactics may have endangered its own hostages earlier this year, saying its actions around Rafah may have impacted Hamas's decision to kill 6 hostages in August. What is the level of concern that any further delay in this ceasefire deal could endanger the lives of the hostages remaining in Gaza?
Absolutely, a very real concern. There's no doubt that if diplomatic negotiations had been more successful, that many more hostages would have been coming home alive, rather than in body bags, as we expect many of them to do. It also is a note of caution, even for President-elect Trump. If he is threatening Hamas, if the deal isn't done in a certain amount of time, what does that leave them? The thing you do not want to do when you are negotiating is to put your opponent or your interlocutor into a position where they have no choice in their own minds but to kill hostages. You do not want them in that position. So everyone should be proceeding very carefully at this point to ensure that the most hostages as possible make it home alive, because we know that many opportunities have been missed during this last year plus.
And if a deal is not struck before January 20th, before the president-elect takes office, what kind of demands might Hamas make of Donald Trump when he takes office?
Yeah. Well, it's difficult to see what demands are left for Hamas. They have clearly lost so much more than they might have thought they could gain by the terrible attack that they carried out on October 7th in 2023. They are absolutely going to have to live with a reoccupation of the Gaza Strip for the foreseeable future, the destruction of the education, the culture, the hospital, the infrastructure of the Gaza Strip that will be very difficult, if at all possible, to rebuild. And so what could they ask? What could they demand is really up in the air. What they might ask is for financial assistance, for the United States to help bring others from the Gulf and beyond to help rebuild the Gaza Strip. But as a demand, it's really difficult to see what could they ask from the position that they're in right now.
And of course, any further delay will result in more deaths on the ground in Gaza there, which has been plunged into that dire humanitarian crisis. What kind of pressure is the US applying to ensure that aid is reaching those who need it?
Well, as you know, the Agency for International Development released a report recently flagging that famine is absolutely a horrific danger, particularly in the northern Gaza Strip. And so the United States is continuing to work. AID Director Samantha Power mentioned recently that she has been able to get things in that might not otherwise have gotten in by her leadership at the Agency for International Development. So the pressure on getting assistance in, while quiet, it's not a front page issue right now in the United States, but it is something that is ongoing in our contacts with the Israeli government. It is a US priority, and that pressure will continue.
Okay, Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, thank you so much for joining us here on BBC News.
Yeah.